The church was in ruins, but so was I, so it was fitting. My leg was broken, my ribs were cracked, my lips were split and my face was so bruised and swollen that I could barely see out of my left eye. The roof of the church had fallen through, and with my good eye I could see the stars. At least it was better to die here than in some secret, sightless basement. I would be beneath the earth soon enough. They hadn't finished with me just yet, though. All my injuries thus far had been gained as I attempted to flee my captors, then attempted to fight them, then tried with my last remaining strength to shield my body as they vented their frustration. The real surgery of interrogation hadn't even begun. They wanted the treasure of the Sword of St. George. They would never believe I didn't know where it was. I was the only one who had escaped the foundering ship, and they hadn't found it when they dived the wreckage. If they had to choose between accepting it was lost and believing they could bleed its rubies out of me, hope can be a dangerous thing. Not just rubies, but emeralds and sapphires, and diamonds and gold, and 1,000 other reasons for them to bloody and break me, until I told them every sin I'd ever committed, from the first kiss I stole from the housemaid's girl, to the last look I gave my shipmates, as the storm-racked waves rose about to swallow them. When I dragged myself, drenched to the bone, into the drifting lifeboat, I heard their cries, begging me to come back for them. Even over the thunder and the crashing of the white-tipped waves I heard them. But I am a coward. God save me, I only found out on that day, but I am a coward. Perhaps this is a fitting punishment. They had left me bound and waiting. That in itself was a bad sign. Any Yorkshire butcher could put a knife to me and bark a question, but the real skill would be in keeping me alive long enough to answer. If they were waiting for more of a reason than to let the fear seep deeper into my bones, it was because they expected the arrival of a specialist. I had heard them talk of a doctor from London. I doubted he was coming to dress my wounds. If they'd sent someone down to fetch him on the morning train, then he could make the evening service, which would already have come in. He was likely in a carriage right now, growing closer by the minute, across the moonlit, mist-vined moors. There was no way to know how long I had. I'd been unconscious when they brought me here, and I didn't recognize this place. I looked about as much as I was able. They had laid me on the altar, as Abraham with Isaac, though there would be no reprieve for me. To my left, the rotten remains of long deserted pews, and on my right the stained glass face of God, our Saviour, on the cross, looking up into the heavens, yet somehow also looking down on me, disdain etched on his rictus features. He already knew my sins. There was no need for him to torment me so. Finally I could bear the judgment in his gaze no longer, and looked away. Then I twisted, so I could not even see him out the corner of my eye. In doing so I came to see the chapel. Just off the transept, a small chamber where the most important parishioners were interred. There were several tombs, and stone plaques upon the walls, and stairs down into the crypt below. The roof must still have been partially intact, for there was still but a few rays of moonlight falling through. One touched the face of an angel. The sculptor must have met the devil at a crossroads, for I couldn't believe that the talent that shaped that marble was natural. Whoever the girl had been, she had been beautiful, yet the hand that carved those high cheekbones, that perfect forehead, and that subtle smile had left out none of their imperfections, so that any viewer could not help but remember that she had walked amongst us mortals before she walked in heaven above. For a moment my breath caught in my throat. I felt the spark of something in my chest. Her eyes met mine, and I almost could believe that she was looking straight at me, her gaze something more than cold and empty stone. I squinted, trying to make out the plaque. I couldn't find her name, the top half was in shadow, but I could read the bottom, where a mason had with painstaking care inscribed in curling letters, died 17th of January, 1792, aged 19 years. The last trace of love I would ever know was for a girl who had been dead over half a century. And yet, was that not better than to die with nothing but cold fear in one's heart? Whoever you were, I whispered, thank you for being here. A man could not wish a fairer face to be the last he ever saw. Somewhere out in the darkness, an owl let out a piercing cry, but when I looked, I saw nothing but the night. I took it as an omen, though of what I didn't know. I turned my eyes back to the girl. I wish I knew your name. Perhaps I'll see you soon, and you can tell me. The frost was beginning to rime the edges of the gargoyle's claws, and my every breath was a billowing silver mist. If my captors left me much longer, the chill might take me before they even had a chance to make me beg for death. It was not to be, however. They arrived only a few minutes later. 3 men who came stomping their way across the churchyard, then threw open the heavy oak door with a thunderous crash, and the ring of old iron bindings on the stone and the shudder of old timber settling again. I knew then that we must be far indeed from any living soul, and that no one would hear and no one would come. They would have no fear of making me scream. The first 2 men I recognised, local bruisers, his lordship's men, thick of fist and head, and none too bothered by the sight of blood. They were simple and they were loyal. I didn't know if their master was genuinely titled, but peer or not, they treated him like one. I would not be able to beg for mercy from them, nor attempt to bribe them. They would do as they were told, and they had been told I was the key to the proceeds of a criminal enterprise that stretched from New York to Calcutta. They would twist me and rattle me, until I turned or until I snapped. The 3rd man was new to me, but I knew him for a doctor the moment I saw him. The fine coat and the gleaming hat were both as black as the night around us, the uniform of a man of means, but it was the canvas bag that announced him as clearly as an usher at a ball. I thought I was cold until he opened that bag, and I saw the instruments that lay therein. It was only then that I started shivering. They did not bother with introductions. The doctor divested himself of his sable coat and replaced it with a workaday apron that might once have been white, but had been stained and scoured to grey. By the light of an oil lamp he set out his instruments, and I saw their shadows cast along the wall as he took them out one by one, and laid them down one by one, with a delicate touch and a deliberate manner and all the deftness of Michelangelo. It will be flesh he sculpted, and he would work his art upon me until I took a disposition more pleasing to him. One of the fists took me by the lapels and called on me to make confession in a most unclerical tone. I babbled. I pleaded. I said everything but the one thing he wanted that I couldn't give. After the sword of St. George splintered on the rocks, the treasure's most likely location was scattered across the bottom of the North Sea. I knew that, and they knew that, but they would only be sure when I had been reduced to naught but gristle and a tongue. The doctor began with my fingernails. I whimpered. I moaned. I didn't want to start screaming yet. I had heard that in the greatest extremes of agony, it was possible to scream until your vocal cords tore. I feared that I might scream until my voice was lost entirely, and no matter how much I wanted to answer, to stop his ministrations even for a moment, I would be unable, and he would continue regardless, on and on and on while I tried to speak but couldn't. So I tried to hold back my screams, not out of bravery, but because I feared what was to come even more. As the doctor calmly and methodically wrenched each fingernail away from the nail bed, one by one, I gritted my teeth. I held, and the doctor paused, and set aside his pliers. Now came the bone screws, and with every turn I let out a gasp until my finger cracked, and I writhed like a snake on a hot steel plate, but I didn't scream. I didn't scream. I tried to concentrate on the stars. Anything but the pain, and the stars in heaven seemed the furthest into the hell I'd found on earth. I saw Bellatrix shining bright on the shoulder of Orion. I counted all the stars around her, and I counted them again as the heavy pliers came out and fixed on my toes. It was only when they dug into the flesh and twisted, and finally ripped my middle toe right off, that I screamed. I finally screamed, but I did not take my eyes off Bellatrix. May she cast down Orion's arrows upon my tormentors. I was becoming delirious. I must be, for I saw a girl in white standing in the open doorway, framed by the ogival arch against the canvas of the night beyond. "Excuse me, sirs." She spoke. My eyes were blurred with pain. so I saw little more than a figure in shining white, but her words were like cool water on my wounds. They did not have the same effect on my interrogators, who turned with a start. "Who the hell are you?" one of the local muscle barked. "I am the daughter of the vicar of this parish. I came because I saw the light and heard the noise. Gentlemen, I know not what your business is, but I am sure it is not appropriate for a house of God. I must ask you to go elsewhere." "This is a house of God no longer," the doctor sneered, and I realized with surprise that it was the first time all night that he had spoken. Not once had he even bothered to address his subject. His voice was rich with pride and scorn. "Are you a simpleton, girl? Don't you see that the roof is gone? This is not a church, it's a ruin. Be off with you, or I might think that confining you to an asylum is the best way to restore your senses." The girl in white did not seem the least bit intimidated. "The seat of the parish is at St. James now. This is still sacred ground. The dead rest here still. You disturb them with your desecration. Again, sirs, I ask you to leave, and let those that lay here have their peace." "And again I tell you, I have no intention of being ordered around by a slip of a girl." The doctor's hitherto cool temper was starting to steam. "I doubt you even are the vicar's daughter. A well-bred young lady would not be wandering the moors in her nightdress. I'm warning you, girl. Don't try my patience further." I thought about crying out for help, but what would she be able to do against the 3 men who held me captive? My only hope was that she would think to report what she saw. If I spoke, if I told her or tried to warn her, she would only share my fate. "A well-bred gentleman would not speak to anyone so," she answered, somehow unconcerned by his threat. "But if I must leave, then leave I shall. I ask one final time that you leave with me." "And for the final time I tell you, we will leave when it suits us and not a second before." "Then I bid you good night, sirs. I will go to my father and the men of the village, and let them know that you are here and do not wish to be disturbed, lest someone walking by should see the light and think to inquire." Scarcely had the last syllable slipped her lips when she turned and hurried back through the doorway and faded into the night, white dress slipping away between the dark tombstones. The doctor muttered a curse under his breath. "Go after her." He snapped at one of the bruises, and my sudden spark of hope was snuffed out sharply. The man hesitated, flat cap kneaded by his calloused hands. "But your lordship, she's just a girl, a simpleton, like you said." So this was him, his lordship, the man I'd worked for these last 5 years, smuggling goods all across the world. I did not think I'd ever see his face, and perhaps, if I had seen those cold eyes, I would not have stayed in his employ, nor come to this. "And she'll be back here with a whole mob of raw simpletons. Do you want to hang for him?" He looked down at me with contempt. "The roads are dangerous at this time of night. See that she meets some misfortune. Be quick about it." With a pained look on his face that I could not pity, the loyal bruiser set his cap on his head and rushed off after her. The doctor returned to his surgery with the same serenity as before, his expression as smooth and blank as stone. I could not match his equanimity. When he cut into another of my toes, I bit my lip. Then as he twisted and tore, I screamed, and as it came away, I screamed. Because I could hold it back no more before he even turned to me again, I screamed. But I did not tell him what I could not tell him, but I wanted so desperately, so very desperately to tell him. My cries did not move the doctor. If anything, he seemed pleased that his instrument had finally produced a note. Now he had only to tune me until I sung the song he wanted to hear. Fingers and toes hadn't been the right keys, and he still had to take care lest I bleed to death too soon. So now he turned to a new procedure. A new shadow was cast across the wall as he thrust the scalpel into the flame. He kept it there, watching with cold eyes, until it glowed red hot enough to burn, but not to destroy the nerve entirely. Then he had his bully man open my shirt and ran the flat of his blade slowly across my chest, teasing, searing. Then he cut, deep, and as he drew the scalpel along, I cried out again, but when that scream was spent, I heard my own blood sizzling under the blade. I had thought of the horror of trying to confess, yet having no voice because I had screamed it away. I had not thought what torment it would be to need to scream, a need almost as physical as breath itself, and not have the air in my lungs to do it. I have no breath, yet still I try, over and over, but I cannot scream. 2 more times he heated the scalpel, then cut me across my chest. I gasped for breath. Every scrap of air I could get expelled the moment I snatched it from the night around me. I thrashed and bucked, and even with the ropes binding me to the altar, the bruiser had to hold my shoulders down, his meaty hands the opposite of the doctor's delicate instruments. The doctor set the scalpel aside for a moment and picked up a flask. I recognized the liquid, caustic, to stop the patient's wounds from pustulating. I knew the doctor did not have my health in mind, though. From the colour, the mixture was unusually concentrated. He held the flask over my chest. I tensed. The first drop beaded on the lip of the flask. When he stopped and frowned and muttered, "She must have doubled back." The lackey looked about in confusion for a moment, and the doctor pointed. I saw, through the broken panes of Mary's face, a white dress. My eyes were streaked with tears, but it could only have been the vicar's daughter. She disappeared, only to pass by the next window a moment later. "Go get her." The doctor snapped at his servant. "Do it however you like, but get it done. You can bury her beside this one." He glanced down at me. "What about Cripps? If the fool can't chase down one girl, then he can walk back to town. But the moors at night, you don't know what they're like. With respect, I mean, your lordship. You might have come to harm. Then I'll have one less simpleton to worry about. And you should worry more about the harm you'll come to if you don't take care of that girl. Go on, after her, before she slips away again." Just as the wayward Mr. Cripps had done, the second bruiser straightened out his cap and set off at a light run, perhaps anxious more to be out of the doctor's sight than to catch his quarry. I expected the doctor to continue his work immediately, but the criminal mastermind was evidently disquieted by the upset to his plans. He stood there, scalpel in hand. Awaiting its touch was an agony in itself, but the blade did not fall. He was too preoccupied. The doctor's eyes scanned this way and that, searching the darkness beyond the walls for some sign of the girl or his compatriot. His breathing was a little tighter now, and his pale face a little paler still. I remembered that he was a stranger in this country, and clearly more used to the hustle and tussle of London. A man of means on cobbled streets, where he had dozens of his men to call on. But what did they mean here? Now his 2 local boys were gone, and what was he really? Naught but a middle-aged man in a fancy coat, who was only used to setting his knife upon those already unconscious or restrained. Thompson, where are you? Have you got her?" he called out. His voice did not waver. Anyone listening would have thought he was as collected as ever, but anyone who could see his face, could see his eyes, would know otherwise. "Blast it, man, where are you? We can't stay here all night." Only in that last sentence did the hint of a plea creep in. Then I saw her, the angel in white. She was standing in the doorway of the chapel, and a beam of moonlight fell so that her dress shone white, but her face was in shadow. I watched her standing there in silence, as the lace hem danced in the midnight breeze. The frost was heavy now, and the mist off the moors was starting to creep through the remnants of the pews. It twisted and turned and took strange shapes. An arm here, a shoulder there, the hint of a face, filling the spaces where the faithful of the parish once sat, those who now rested beneath us. An audience. But my vision was clouded by pain and my own bitter blood, and when I looked again I saw only mist. "You, what are you doing here?" The doctor had finally noticed the girl. "Where's Thompson?" He was shouting now. "On the moors, doing as you made him do, following a white dress," she answered softly. "Like your friend Mr. Cripps, until he realized he was chasing naught but mist. Too late to find his way back to the road, though." She came forward, into the moonlight, and close enough that I could see her face clearly for the first time. There was a part of me that was not surprised that it was the face I had seen carved in stone, from a young woman dead since the last century. "What do you want?" the doctor cried, raising the scalpel with a shaking hand. "What do you want?" "I told you what I want. 3 times I asked, and 3 times you denied me. You did not leave my request, so now you never shall." "Who are you?" She continued to advance towards the altar. He began to back away. "Who are you?" "I told you that as well. I am the daughter of the vicar here. You desecrate the altar where my father once gave communion." Her calmness and her poise were unwavering, unnerving, unnatural. She barely seemed to touch the flagstones on which she trod. The doctor was sweating despite the frost. He gulped, "If I have offended you, miss, then I offer my apologies." He said it as gentlemanly as a lord, and he kept the scalpel pointed at her, and step by step he kept backing away. She was almost at the altar now. Every pace she took was slow and deliberate, and I noticed her feet were bare. She had approached in such a manner that she was now standing between the doctor and the main door. "I'm sorry, but it's too late for that." And she shook her head as if genuinely saddened. "Some sins must be paid for in blood." "It isn't fair. I only wanted what is mine." "It isn't fair that I died with only 19 years in this world behind me." For the first time there was a note of anger in her voice, and for a moment the wind rose to a howl, but like mist it dissipated as soon as it had gathered. "Do not be troubled, sir. All you deserve shall be yours." The doctor stopped. For a moment I thought he was about to lunge forward and drive the scalpel right into her chest. Then he turned and ran for the vestry and the back door. He got 5 paces. Then there was a grinding sound, then cracked stones slipping, and rotting beams giving way. My eyes were still fixed on her, so I did not see the doctor fall through the long untended floor into the crypt, but I heard the crash, and I heard his cry, "Cut off." I let out a long exhalation of relief. It was over. Not only would my former employer not kill me tonight, I could leave knowing I was safe from him forevermore. There was an array of sharp objects next to me, and my bindings were loose enough that I could reach for them. There was no need, however. My angel came and stood beside me, and suddenly I found the ropes were loose. I tried to sit up, but I had little strength. She sat upon the altar beside me and placed her hand upon my chest, and the sting of my wounds subsided. She smiled down at me, and I, in turn, enraptured, gazed at her. "Please tell me, what is your name?" "I will tell you, if you answer a question for me. Will you promise to?" "I promise," I said hoarsely. "My name is Annabella Lockwood. Now will you answer my question?" She smiled. "Remember, you promised." "Yes, anything." She leaned forward, her light hair falling beside my face, until her lips were just beside my ear, and she whispered, "Was it worth it?" I blinked. "Was what worth it?" "The treasure that you buried on the cliffs above Whitby town." The blood froze in my veins. I opened my mouth, but I could not find my voice. "Was it worth all those men you murdered?" "No, wait," I gasped. "It wasn't like that. The lifeboat. The waves swept it away as we were loading the chest. I had to dive into the water. I was the only one who made it." "You were the first who made it. The others could have, but you started rowing away from them." "It wasn't. I didn't. The boat would have been smashed on the rocks if I'd gone back." "Hush. No lies now. They could have reached you, but you left them in the water, left them to die. So tell me, was it worth it? I thought back to that day, and the treasure beside me in the boat, and the 12 men I'd sailed with for years in the water, and the piece of me that had bowed under the weight of all that gold, then bent, then finally broken until I took the oars in my hands and started to row, even as they were screaming for me to save them, then simply screaming, until the waves took their voices and they were gone. That was what I feared the most, the moment when I was still struggling, still fighting for life, but could not scream. No, I answered finally. I will get everything in that chest to go back and save them. The ghost of Annabella Lockwood sat up and looked down at me sadly. My father would have given all his wealth to bring me back. The statue costs a small fortune, and it captures my likeness perfectly. But when it was done, it was still just stone, and I was still a corpse. No amount of money can bring the dead back to life. She gave me one last smile, then turned her head so that the moonlight caught her face. No, not a face. A skull, white as the dress she wore. I gasped and tried to rise. But there is still a price to be paid. With her hand upon my chest she pushed, and the stone altar cracked, that fell away from under me. I was falling down, down, down into the darkness beneath. I landed on my back, and if it stunned me for a moment, then the cold shocked me awake a second later. I was in the crypt, the eyes of stone saints and the sockets of skulls looking down in judgment upon me, and just across, lit up by a shaft of moonlight coming through the hole above him, I saw the doctor, impaled upon the embellishments of a medieval knight sarcophagus, splayed across his kneeling effigy, blood trickling down from a stone sword. He was still moaning, still twitching. His victims never got a quick death, and nor would he. I had been lucky. The crypt had been left untended so long it was partially flooded, and I had landed in the water. By the moonlight I could see the nearest stonework and the stairs up to the chapel. But my ordeal had weakened me. My leg was still broken, and agonizing to move. I struggled and I thrashed, but I couldn't make any headway. My head dipped beneath the water. I rose again and gasped, only to slip back under. Again I clawed my way back up and shouted out for help. Even though I knew no help would come, I shouted and finally screamed. Then the darkness closed over me one final time. I have no breath, yet still I am trying, over and over and forever. But I cannot scream.